Children who grew up in Britain in the 1940s lived in a world that was impacted every day by war. Bombs were dropped almost every day, a constant threat to the safety of innocent civilians. Children often had to wait to experience things that children in other time periods would take for granted during their own childhoods. To the children who grew up during World War II, sacrificing food and toys and hiding from air raids was completely normal. Most of them didn't know anything else until years after the war ended. Such was the case for David Copnall, who was born in the middle of the Second World War.
Yes, my name is David Copnall. I was born in the middle of the war on the 6th of March 1942, which is, I think, a Friday morning, 6 in the morning if we want to get definitive, in a small village called Little Sutton, which was about 8 to 10 miles south of Liverpool. And with it being a small village, there was no nearby hospital, so I was born in the front room of the house with midwife and my mum and somebody else helping, and that's how life was there.
Sometimes his family had to make small sacrifices to maintain some sense of normalcy.
I mean, I didn't realize at the time, but Mum baked a cake. Well, for that you need 4 or 5 eggs, you need butter. She had to save up, and we did without eggs, so they saved the coupons up until the next week, where she could get 6 or 8 eggs, 4 from the week before and 4 from this week, so she could bake a cake and, you know, do something for us.
Other times he knew exactly what he was missing, but he had to wait until the end of the war to get his hands on it.
I badly wanted, when I realized I was 2 to 3 years old, a bike. Well, you can go to the shop and get one now. There were none in existence. You couldn't buy a bike, a little bicycle, you know. And so once I got to be mobile with the walking around like this as they do, and starting to get, and you see pictures of these things, oh, I want a bike. And so it wasn't until I was 4 and a half before I could get one.
Sometimes David didn't even realize what he was missing out on until 4 or 5 years after the end of the war.
I never saw a banana or an orange until about I was 7, because they weren't available. Because everything on with having to be brought in by ships, most of it was for the war effort, for steel, aluminum, and the things that were needed to make for the war effort. So that's how life was then.
Winston Churchill encouraged the people of Britain to take part in the war effort. Such encouragement often came in the form of mandatory rationing.
The British government went to a system of rationing for the whole populace. For the normal person between 16 and however old, they got a buff-coloured ration book. You could get 1 egg, 4 ounces of meat or bacon, 2 ounces of butter, 2 ounces of tea, 1 ounce of cheese, or 8 ounces of sugar a week. That's how the general store was. You went in and you got served by the person behind, and you would stand in line if you waited your turn. And you would have your own basket. They would put it in, then you had to produce your ration card, which then showed on what you were allowed for that week. And they would either stamp or take out the little squares, perforated squares, to show that you got it. I had the luxury of like 2 ounces of candy, or sweets we called it, a week. You know, you get a couple of little chocolates or fruit drops. You got 4 or 5 of those and that was it. That was your supply for the week. Bread was baked every day, but they couldn't sell it straight away. They had to wait for a day for it to go a little bit stale and harder, so that when they cut it, it was easier to cut and they could get more slices out of it. The house where I live, we had quite a lot of fruit trees. So in September, we had a lot of apples, pears, green gages, plums. My dad kept 5 beehives, and and so as a kid, and this was just a little bit after the war, but it was still rationed. You know, we went in and we had honey. Clothing was also rationed because the materials that were used in clothes, wool and everything else, was needed to make the uniforms for the sailors, soldiers and Air Force people. For a person that wasn't 100% necessary for the war effort, then they didn't get gasoline. And that was needed for the aircraft, the trucks, people going to and from work. You're only allowed 3 to 4 gallons a week for those that needed it, such as doctors or a minister. People working in the industry had to get back and forwards from work. The rationing ended in 1954. It was sort of a gradual thing, with as things at the end of the war, well, we didn't need bullets and aircraft so much anymore, and we could go over to using the ships for carrying goods and everything else.
The use of radio technology and Morse code was particularly impactful to David, whose father started working as a Morse code reader for the Royal Air Force.
What they did to communicate during the war was by Morse code. And my father was very good at reading all that, and he was one of 4 in this station that picked up the messages which were transported in code over the air by the Germans. It would all be in code, and in a series of 5 or 6 letters. Then there'd be a slight break, then there'd be another 5 or 6. And he would just write it down. That's what he did. And this was in Cheadle in Staffordshire. You know, it's not a 9 to 5 job being in the army. You don't start at 9 in the morning and finish at 5. All guys from 18, that was the conscription age, you had to go into the service. And then you went either off to be in the Army, Navy, to be in the Royal Navy, or the Merchant Navy, and or the Air Force, which was what my dad did. He was very lucky in that respect that he wasn't sent overseas, or because a lot of guys didn't come back. You know, they're still over there. We lived in Cheadle for the duration of the war, because my mum wanted to be with him, obviously, with occasional trips to Little Sutton. So he would work for at least 8 to 12 hours a day, have 8 or 12 hours off, then another 8 to 12. So there was always somebody there at the base manning the radio 24/7, you know, rain, snow or whatever. And they would write things down, and if things got really hectic, they would put, you know, 2 radios up and they'd bring somebody in. So he could be on watch for 12 hours, get back to the apartment we had there near the base, maybe only have 4 hours sleep, and put, you know, the things have gone haywire, we need you back, and he would have to go back there, and that's how it was. Well, it went on because little did they know, we had the advantage of radar. Well, we all know what radar is now, but in those days it was the infancy of it, and the Brits were the foremost leaders. They discovered how it worked, and just by watching a screen, and they knew from the blips, because they would send a signal out, it would hit the aircraft, it would return it, and it would see by the time it took from going from there to there how long it was, and they could judge what height they were, so they knew by the amount of blips on the screen on how many aircraft were coming in. Where it really changed was 1944, beginning of 44, because there was an aircraft called the P-51 Mustang, and that was an American-made plane, and somebody had the very bright idea of putting the Merlin engine. Now, the Merlin engine was used in the Spitfire, and this was a 12-cylinder engine, supercharged, had a much higher horsepower, and this engine was produced for the Spitfire and the Lancaster bombers. The Lancasters had 4 of these in, and a lot more, because it was a brilliantly designed, and it had a lot of power, and suddenly they had, for the time, it was the best fighter aircraft, no doubt. And that way they could escort the bombers all the way into Berlin and all the way back again. They had like a crisscross of sticky tape, and that was for if a bomb went nearby and went off, it would shatter the windows, and that would help keep it together so that it didn't go off in little pieces. We were lucky, our house was only damaged once, and that was when all the windows were blown out by a bomb that went off very near, and it blew all the windows out.
Unfortunately, many other people were not so lucky. Many families left their bomb shelters to find their homes completely demolished by a German bomb. At one point during the Blitz, London was bombed for 57 straight nights.
Hospitals were bombed, unfortunately, over in Europe.
On October 9, 1940, St. Paul's Cathedral was hit by a German bomb. The site of St. Paul's Cathedral was very important. In 604 AD, the first Christian cathedral there was dedicated to St. Paul. During the Blitz, there was a constant threat of a possible attack. People who lived in the city, especially those in London, would hide underground when they heard an air raid warning. Bomb shelters were common, especially in rural and suburban areas. Air raids could take anywhere from a half an hour to 3 hours, so families hid in their bomb shelters until the threat dissipated.
My first recollection really was the searchlights, because I had no comprehension of what war was. Mum would take me by the hand, and we've got to go to the shelter, and why, you know, and I thought, oh, I want to look at the pretty lights. The houses got bombed and a lot of civilians got killed. Kids, women and men, everything, dogs, whatever, you know, were killed. It's just total devastation.
For 9 consecutive months, the Luftwaffe dropped bombs on some of Britain's most important cities in an attempt to kill the most people and cause the most damage possible.
The bombs had no direction like they do now, and you just went over and they just dropped a big, what was called a stick of bombs. They just went with what was called carpet bombing. So there was a big area, maybe 10 or 15 football fields wide and long, and it was devastated apart from the bits in between.
One of the simplest yet most important wartime innovations was blackout curtains, which the British used so that the Germans could not see their houses from in the sky during the Blitz.
In England, obviously at night, you had a blackout where you put a curtain or there were no lights to be shown. you know, so anybody flying above could see where you were, but Berlin was lit up like, you know, the 4th of July. And so the guys who went on that raid said, couldn't miss. 20 or 30 bombers together, quite close, and they come upon the target, okay, let it go now.
British retaliation for German attacks during the Blitz was often very brutal. The damage done over the course of the Blitz to both Britain and Germany was extensive. Some experts believe that over 100,000 people were killed or injured in Britain during the Blitz.
Yeah, war, people are going to get hurt. People are going to hurt bad on both sides. Nobody wins. So it's just what you got used to, or because you didn't, there was nothing else. You know, that's how life was. It was just a matter of surviving. Although it's happened for thousands of years, you know, it's war is a bad thing, and as a lesson to future generations of what they say, man's inhumanity to man in the quest of whatever.
The first time I ever watched David Copnall's full interview, the story about his mom saving up rations to make him a birthday cake stood out to me. She saved up her eggs and his father's, the whole family's, just so she could make him a birthday cake. And he was just a little kid. That was a given. He got a birthday cake. That was what he expected. He never understood how much he was sacrificing. He never realized how much his whole family was sacrificing, not just to make a birthday cake, but to make ends meet. That made me put some aspects of my life into perspective. Working on a class like the Harlem Veteran Project, there's no room to be selfish. I can't just come in one day and say, I don't feel like it. This class is probably the most positive stress I have ever known. I literally haven't had time for the sad days, or the bad days, or the lazy days. My number one priority is working on this class. My number one priority is getting David's documentary done. The Harlem Vet Project is so much bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us. The beautiful things that we can create are more meaningful to other people than we can ever fathom. Every single story that is shared with us is a piece of history that deserves to be shared. My only hope in creating this documentary is that I have shared David Copnall's piece of history in a way that will make him proud.